Welcome to another Digital Anarchy tutorial. I'm Jim Tierney, president of Digital Anarchy, and in this tutorial we're going to be going over the basics of Primatte Event for Aperture. As you might expect, the Aperture version is a little bit different than the Photoshop version, so if you're looking for Primatte Chromakey for Photoshop, that is a separate tutorial. This is for Primatte Event, and let's get into it. Now, one of the big new features in Primatte Event is the ability to tether your camera to Aperture and use that to input the photos and then apply Primatte to the images that you've just taken. And you do that by going up to File, going to Tether, and starting Session. And once you do that, it'll pull up this dialog box. You can start the session and go. And you can start taking shots, applying Primatte to it, adding in the background, printing them or saving them as you will. But we've done a whole tutorial on that workflow, so I'm really not going to cover it here. I just want to point out that it is one of the big features in Primatte Event, and is in fact part of the reason that it's named Primatte Event, is that it's great for event photographers that want to do live shoots. But as I said, there's an entire other tutorial that goes over tethering in detail, and so we're not going to really discuss it here. I just, again, wanted to point out that it's there. And we'll stop this session because I don't have a camera connected right now. And I encourage you to check that out. Tethering is a really great way of using Primatte. It allows you to have that live workflow, and it's something we're really excited about. It's really a powerful solution for event photography. But to start off with, in this tutorial, we're going to do it the old-fashioned way. And I'm going to select one of my images that's already in one of my libraries. Now, the nice thing about Aperture, which you'll see when we're finished, is that once you apply Primatte, it leaves the original alone. It creates a version of the image that has Primatte applied to it. And so if you want to go back and make changes, you can do that. So, but at this point, we're starting off on one of my originals, one of my raw files in one of my libraries. And I'm going to go up to Photos and Edit with Plugin and go to Primatte. And once I do that, it's going to pull my image into Primatte, bring it up in the Primatte UI. And by default, it's going to automatically key out my subject. Now in this case, I've got some stuff left over from a previous session. And so if you want to get Primatte back to its default state, what you need to do is go up to Reset All and hit Reset All. And this will get rid of any backgrounds or overlays that you might have. I'm going to rescale my UI so it fits within my tutorial viewer here. So that gets me back to my default settings for Primatte. Now, one of the big features in Primatte 5.0 was the ability to add backdrops and overlays. This is essential to Aperture. Aperture does not have transparency. So unlike Photoshop, if you just click OK right now, it's going to take this back to Aperture with this gray background. And while that may be a little bit of an improvement over the green background that was there, probably it's not what you want. So unlike Photoshop, you have to use the backdrops section to incorporate a different background. Because in Photoshop, you can save this out and it will just be on a transparent layer. And then you can go ahead and add in any background that you want later. But because Aperture does not have the ability to give you transparency, that is not possible in Aperture. And so again, you need to use the backdrop section if you want to have a backdrop there. And so we're going to add in a few different backdrops. I just click on my plus key right here, and that will bring up a file dialog. And we can scroll down and select whatever background we want. In this case, we're going to grab a TIFF file and load that in. You can see that's a pretty standard portrait background. Looks okay, and so I'm going to click on the plus again. It'll remember where we last picked our background from, so I can now come in and select another background, kind of a satin sheet type of thing. Click on plus again, and we'll load in our last background, which is sort of a grungy type of look. So this gives us 3 backgrounds of various ranges. And I think the one that I really like is the first one that we had. And so that sort of brown portrait background. And so I'm going to select that and click on the F button here. I could also right click on this or control click on a Mac and click on Move to Front. Either the right-click menu or the F button will move that background to the front and make that the background that we're going to use. And the overlays work the same way. I'm not really going to go into that, but if you're doing, like, say, Little League Sports or something, and you want to incorporate a logo in the front with the team name and the year or what have you, you would just click on the plus button, pull in those overlays, and it works exactly the same as the backdrop section. Now, one really important thing is the Render BD button. If you accidentally turn this off, it will not render the background. And again, this is particularly problematic in Aperture where you don't have transparency. So if I render out like this is what I'm going to get. I'm going to get her on a gray background. But if you accidentally turn this off, you won't see the background in the preview window, and so you should know that something's gone wrong. But if you're not seeing your background, the most likely cause, assuming that you have some backdrops in the backdrop section, is that Render BD is turned off. If we turn that back on, the backdrop comes back and we're good to go. Another very cool thing that we added in Primatte 5.0, which of course is in Primatte Event, is the Move section. And this allows you to transform, which is basically position, rotate, scale, what have you, anything that's in the Primatte preview window. So whether it's the overlay, the subject, the backdrop, we can grab our subject, maybe position her a little bit differently if we want, grab our backdrop, click on scale, and maybe scale that up or down. And the way it works, as you've just seen, is you click the checkbox next to whatever you want to transform, and then select whichever tool you want, and then just go into the preview window and click on that, and you can see we're moving our backdrop around. We can do all sorts of fun things like rotating the subject, because, you know, all of our clients want this type of thing. Now, if they don't want this type of thing, of course, we can click Undo, which is just Command-Z or Control-Z on Windows. Or you can right-click on the preview window and click on Undo, and that will also work. But hopefully this is pretty self-explanatory. You just click on the checkbox next to what you want to transform, and then click on the Transform tool, and just click and drag in the preview window. Very quick and very easy. One other thing to note is that if you have a detailed background, you can also blur that out a little bit. You can see down here we have the BD blur, which is backdrop blur. And if we click that, if we move the slider, which is slightly off the screen, but you'll see the numbers change. As I move that, it's going to blur out my background. Now, this is not such a big deal with this background. It's already pretty soft to begin with. But if you have a background like, say, my grunge background here, which is kind of interesting if we're kind of going for that industrial look. Maybe she's an industrial type of gal. This background has a little bit too much detail, and we would like to make it a little bit softer. So BD blur really comes in handy here. Maybe that's a little bit too much. Set that around 3-ish. But you get the idea. You can soften up the background, make it look a little bit defocused, and make it look more like a background should look. But in this case, she's really not doing the industrial thing, so we're going to switch back to our original background, turn off that blur, and move on to light wrap, which is vastly improved in the new version. The previous version of Primatte did have light wrap, which worked okay, but with the new ones, we have improved it so that you can add in different types of blend modes, and it actually behaves better all the way around when it's applied. And what light wrap does is it takes the background that you've chosen and wraps that around the edge of the subject. And the reason for this is that it can create more convincing composites. Sometimes you have a little bit of fringing around the edges, which doesn't look quite right, and light wrap will usually take care of that. And in this case, I'm going to set it to add, so it's very apparent what's happening. You will probably not want to make it this obvious. So you can see the background starting to wrap around the edges here, and especially affect the lighter areas of the image. And if I increase the radius, it's going to account for more of that. You can see that really wrapping around the edges here. Now this is way too much, but I just want to show exactly what's happening when I say it's wrapping around the subject. And if I turn light wrap off, you can see the original, you can see the affected version, and so on. In this case, I really don't think it needs it. It's really not adding much to it anyways, and so we're just going to go ahead and turn that off. But in a lot of cases, if you have green spill or blue spill around the edges, say her arm or the back of her dress or something like that, it's especially handy if someone's wearing white, because white tends to pick up a little bit more spill than, say, something like a black dress. It will be quite effective in helping you out, creating a really nice composite. And so let's move on to spill. You have two tools here, Spill Minus and Spill Sponge. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more. And you can grab the pan tool to move around, or you can also, if say you have a different tool selected, you can also grab the space bar and press that down and move around. And you can see her hair right here is really, looks like it's got a little bit of spill in it. And so I'm going to grab my Spill Minus tool, and I'm just going to click on the area that I have a problem with, and it's going to start sampling that green out of that hair. We're going to remove that green color component and create and get much closer to her original hair color with that. Hopefully you don't have a lot of green spill to begin with. And so by just grabbing the Spill Minus tool and just clicking on the areas that I think have a little bit of green in them, it will color correct that and give me a much nicer image. And as you saw, it did a pretty nice job of getting rid of the color contamination that was there, getting rid of that spill, and getting the color much closer to the rest of the hair that she has. So that's the way Spill Minus works. And again, we have a whole nother tutorial on just Spill Minus. So this is really just a cursory overview of all the tools within Primatte. We'll leave it up to other tutorials to explain those tools in detail, and we certainly have a couple tutorials on removing spill, as it's a really important part of the process. But that brings us up to Auto Mask. Now, Auto Mask is also really improved from the previous version of Primatte. It does a much better job of keying out the subject to begin with, and also does some automatic color correction on top of that. And so really our hope is that you won't spend a lot of time having to worry about the Spill Minus tool, because we've already done it automatically for you. Essentially the way Auto Mask works is when you open up an image, it's going to automatically try and remove the background. And if we click on the Auto Mask settings, we can see that we've got a few different parameters. The only one that you're really going to change is the radius. If you've got someone with, say, a lot of flyaway hair, say you're down in Texas and you got some girl with like massive big hair, you might want to crank the radius up to like 80 or 90. Spill suppression and color correction are pretty much good the way they're set. If you really have a lot of spill, you're really much better off going in there and playing around with it manually with Spill Minus or Spill Sponge or even Fine Tune than letting Primatte try and do it automatically. So these are the Auto Mask settings. Again, the radius is the one that might be really useful to you. And the functional range here is really between about 30 and 90. And so we'll go ahead and close that. And Auto Mask is always on, as you saw from the little button here. Of course, you can turn that off if you want to manually do each photo that you're bringing in. And that might be the case if you're doing like full-length shots. Auto Mask really works best on 3/4 and headshot type images, as we have here, where this is basically a 3/4 shot. She's not actually standing on the floor. It's going to have a much higher success rate with the 3/4 length shots than with the full length shots. And the new Auto Mask does have a very high success rate for those types of shots. So it's a really great tool and creates a really nice workflow. And the only other section I'm going to touch on is the matte settings, and I'm going to go through the masking basics just to show you how to manually create a mask. So the matte settings will soften the edge around my subject. And again, this is sort of a way of dealing with spill. In some cases, you'll have flyaway hair that you just really can't deal with, and softening everything up is really a nice way of dealing with it. And it's not really necessary in this image, but you can see that if I turn Soften Matte on and off, it's getting rid of some of the edge hair here, and it can make for a nice, smoother composite. Just really depends on the image and the background as well. And so I'm going to turn this off because I don't think it's really necessary. And we're going to jump into manually creating a mask. And so what I'm going to do is reset all once again. get rid of the background completely. So you can see by default, Auto Mask is already turned on. It's already removing the background. And Auto Mask actually does a pretty good job on this image. And so what I'm going to show you here is really not meant for this image. It's really meant for when the Auto Mask doesn't work out. And you'll see that this image is not perfectly shot. There's a little bit of green variation on the background. So potentially, this is the type of thing that might cause the Auto Mask a little bit of trouble. And if it does, it's really useful to know the techniques I'm going to show you right here to help clean things up. So let's go back to our composite. And step one is selecting the background. This is setting the green color that we're removing from the image. If I take a look at my mask, I can see what's going on with the first initial selection. And so what we want from this is the background to be perfectly black, the foreground subject to be perfectly white, and then areas like the hair, we want to have a little bit of gray shading in just to allow a little bit of transparency in. This is essentially creating a mask very similar to a layer mask, where black is completely transparent, white is completely opaque, and shades of gray are somewhere in between. And you're seeing this band along the edge here, and that's corresponding to this darker shade of green. Remember, we sort of clicked in this area to set the initial green color. And Primatte's not picking up all this completely. So what we need to do is move to Clean Background, which is step 2. We'll switch to our Box Selector tool. And this will allow us to draw a box around this area. And it'll start sampling all those colors and adding all those colors to the range of green colors that are being masked out. And I can do it down here. You can see, which may not be noticeable in the video, but you can also see that there's a little bit of light gray noise here, and we want to get that as well. And then we want to move on to step 3, which is cleaning the foreground. And we want to make the foreground completely white, completely opaque. So we'll get our eyes there, get a little bit of noise that was down here. And that mostly looks really good. So now let's take a look at our composite and see how that looks. You can see it's done a really nice job. But as we ran into before, there's a little bit of green spill on the edges of our hair here. And we can use our Spill Minus tool. We'll switch back to Point, which is sort of the better selection tool for Spill Minus. And we'll click and drag on these areas and sample out that green color component. And so that's going to give us a nicer look. And now we can go ahead and say add in a background. And that's really all there is to it. So now we can take this and go back out to Aperture. Now we have more tutorials that go into that process much more in depth if you're frequently running into problems that you think would benefit from doing manual masks. This is especially helpful with full-length shots. We definitely have more in-depth tutorials. I just wanted to give you a brief overview of how that works. But now we're done with this image and we can click OK, and this will take us back out to Aperture. And you can see that it's created a version of my original image. The original image is untouched, so if we want to go back at some point and make some changes, we can just reselect our original image and reapply Primatte to it. And then we'll still have this version as well. And so that pretty much covers the intro to Primatte Event for Aperture. We have lots of other tutorials on digitalanarchy.com that go over a lot of these subjects that I touched on in a lot more depth. The spill removal, and color correction, and working with manual masks, working with the background and overlays. All that stuff is covered in much more detail in other tutorials, including the batch processing, which I didn't really talk about because we're not really working with multiple images. But that's a really powerful tool within Aperture and the way Primatte Event accesses it. And it creates a really great workflow if you're doing high volume photography, sports or schools or events where you've got a lot of photos that you're really trying to get through. It's a really powerful workflow. And of course, we also have the tutorial on tethering. So if you're doing live shoots, that's a great tutorial, another great feature in Primatte Event for Aperture. But that's the end of this tutorial, so thank you for joining me and look forward to seeing you in other tutorials.